Our next item of business is a discussion panel. Hang on, I'm going to grab my prop. A discussion panel which will be centering on this book, A Long Time Coming, which outlines the negotiations that culminated in the Ngāi Claims settlement. A lot of scholarship on the treaty claims process has thus far really hinged on the tribunal process, of the nature of lodging a claim and the discussion of evidence and so on, or it looks at what's happened since settlement. Very little has been dedicated to the actual negotiations themselves. So this book is filling what has been up until now quite a hole in our understanding. So we're going to pull together a panel. I'm just going to bring some seats up. We have the author with us here, Dr. Martin Fisher from the University of Canterbury. His boss, Tūpoko Ngai Tuahuriri Te Maire Tau. We also have Emeritus Professor David Williams from the University of Auckland, and finally Tā Tipene O'Regan, Taku Upoko o Awarua. Okay, so in the latest edition of the Ngāi Tahu magazine, Te Karaka, a particularly clever reviewer described this book, A Long Time Coming, as important and judicious. And he asserted that, quote, placing a copy in every Ngāi Tahu whānau would make us a wiser and better people. Placing a copy in every New Zealand library and school would make this a wiser and better nation. So the point of this session then is to give a sense of why that is so, and as a result, of course, help Martin move some units. On that note, Martin's going to have a stall set up in the passageway. He will autograph them for a small fee. Free. But I think he only has about 50 copies. So, bluff rules, first and best dressed. Okay, so we're hoping for this to be an interactive session, which is to say we will take some questions from the audience. But to get the ball rolling, and I think give us a bit of context for some of those questions, I have got a few prompts here. So I'm going to start with Dr. Martin Fisher. Martin, you currently work for the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre at the University of Canterbury, but you were born in Budapest, in Hungary. You were raised variously in Italy, Canada, the United States of America, and New Zealand. Tell us, how did you end up writing a book on the Ngāi Tahu claim negotiations and settlement? How did you end up in Bluff? It feels like you took a wrong turn in Albuquerque.
Kia ora. First, thank you so much. I feel really honoured to be speaking in this whare. This beautiful whare. This is my first time, so I just want to say thank you to yourself and to the Awarua Runaka. I come from many different places around the world, but I am Hungarian originally, but basically the son of immigrants moving around the world and eventually settling here in Aotearoa. And so I've spent most of my adulthood here, and so I've been very fortunate to be engaged with learning history, just as Minister Woods was mentioning, the importance of that. And I actually didn't study New Zealand history originally. I studied American history, but I became very interested in New Zealand's history, and it's so important, I think, that 2022 into the curriculum, it's obviously almost an embarrassment that it's taken us this long to place it, but that's what got me interested. Hopefully we can get our young people interested in it, just as it fascinated me, that the history of this country is full of drama, is full of interest, and of course, things like resolving treaty claims is incredibly dramatic, is incredibly serious, and oftentimes heartbreaking as well. So that really drew me to it. And I was very fortunate. My supervisor was one of the first officials at the Treaty of Waitangi Policy Unit, which is where treaty settlement negotiations began in the late 1980s, Richard Hill. And he's the one who introduced me to this world, and I feel very, very fortunate to have been able to, invited by Te Maire to come work at the Ngāi Tahu Research Centre. And yeah, I just can't speak enough of how humble I am for this here. Kia ora.
Kia ora, Martin. So, Te Maire, you've been name-checked. Your father, the late Rakihia Tau, is a key character in the book. He lodged the Ngāi Tahu claim, of course, with the Waitangi Tribunal. Given the extensive public talks that he gave on the claim, to public interest groups and so on, and the settlement through the late 1980s and early 1990s. Do you think he would have welcomed this book, and what would he have made of it?
Well, that is really a hard question. Because oh, my God, Michael. Would he have welcomed the book? I think the best answer I can give is, I think he would have in his early years. There's two fathers. One is the early side of my father, when really with the Ngāi Tahu claim, he believed if everyone read Harry Everson's book, it all makes sense and we'd all settle and that'd be the end of the claim. I think he took a more critical view as years went by, but I think if he's sitting there somewhere, possibly he'd be reassessing his own views that he had on his dying years. I think, to be fair, he was against the claim and the settlement, but I think, like I said, there were two fathers, the first one, the second one, and people change their minds all the time. And I think the real kaupapa is tino rangatiratanga, and it's the stages on the bridge to get there that Megan spoke about.
Okay, so it's a maybe. That's fine. Professor David Williams, you're a highly regarded academic, but also something of a rarity in contemporary New Zealand, an academic who comes down from the ivory tower in pursuit of social justice, particularly with Māori. So as someone who has taught both students and lay people about New Zealand's legal and constitutional history, I'm interested to know where and how you think this book will be received.
Well, korono koutou. I'm just an old political activist that got respectable, because, you know, we didn't get much thanks for being involved in the occupation of Takaporapa Bastion Point back in the day. Everyone now is in favour of it, aren't they? Yes, of course. We're all so wonderful, except that we weren't. I claim that I've stayed in the same position all the time. We ought to honour the treaty, and we ought to honour Mātauranga Māori, and we ought to find ways of living together in this nation. And the Y27 claim, so number 27 it was, that this book leads to the settlement, and those early proceedings made a huge contribution to the rest of Aotearoa, not least in my field of history, that almost all of the historians working for the Crown finished up working for iwi all around the Motu in the years thereafter. So what moulded those people, the historians and the lawyers and that were working, and the tribunal members themselves, how did it all put together? And this book will give you some of the answers. Kia ora.
Right, tā tīpuni. You're on the cover of this book. You're very much the public face of Ngāi Tahu in the 1980s and 1990s. I'm interested to know if your memories of that time dovetail with the archival records that Martin drew on and the conclusions he arrived at, or is there some sort of gap there?
Well, you've got to appreciate that I had a senior cousin who's now a knight and a judge of the Supreme Court, who was at the time a partner in Chapman Tripp, which was a sort of outhouse of Crown law. And and I mean that in all the potential uses of the term outhouse. They were engaged very much in the negotiation of the detail. And so it was a great treasure to me to read the book and see what was happening in the Crown bureaucratic side as distinct from the ministerial side right through that series of negotiations. I'm very conscious of the fact that Martin, he's heard me say this before, he was working in Crown law, he was working in Treaty Policy Unit, he was working and he had access to the Crown's archives, he had access to Ngāi Tahu's archives. And he's almost uniquely placed, and I say this in the preface, he's almost uniquely placed to put this book together. The only area that he doesn't emphasise, in my view, sufficiently, and it's another subject for another time, there's going to be more written on these things, is the fact that in the middle of this negotiation, we had the whole fisheries litigation, fisheries negotiation, fisheries settlement, and all of the evolution of that. And in that context, we were doing so much of the settlement content in relation to natural resources, to dock and various other matters, customary water, which still, customary rights in water, which we're still getting, to what extent are they a property and what extent they are not. Those questions are still hanging around out there, and they're still working their way through the relationship. But it's, and I think the fact that the way in which that whole fisheries evolution impacted on this process we're discussing in the book, I think is a further story yet to unfold. But it is simply the best available analysis and record we have of this important interaction. When you're doing it, you don't realise what you're doing. In retrospect, we made a template which lasted right through until the Tūhoe settlement. We created a template which is followed by the parties, the Crown and the lawyers, right through till the breakthrough with Tūhoe, with the creation of a legal personality in place, which I believe is one of the most singular triumphs of New Zealand to date. But that's another story.
So on that note, we can throw open to the floor. Maybe some of you have nerdily already read the book and you want to quibble over a footnote on page 43. Perhaps some of you have just generated a question in a more general sense off the back of the commentary we've heard already. We're nearly getting into awkward silence territory. Gerard, I thought your dad would have given you some sort of patsy question. No? Yeah. I mean, I think I'm going to let David say something on this, but I think you raise a really good point that if we don't, in the kind of New Zealand history curriculum, if we don't capture things like that, then we've cocked up again, but in different ways.
Kia ora, Tim, a friend from Ngā Rawamua a long time ago now. So just to say that Edwini Hawke, Joe Hawke's father, was getting really desperate to plant some kumara, and there was not enough people around to dig the ground there on Bastion Point, and really the occupation wasn't going to go on unless they can feed themselves. And would Tim please go and get a rotary hoe? And so Tim decided he would go and get a rotary hoe, and he asked me to go with him. So I went with him, not quite sure why I was relevant to getting the rotary hoe from Glen Eden, which is near where he lived, except that when I got there, he said, "Well, David, you're here to pay." So there we are. I contributed to the struggle in that way. So that's what allies do. So serious answer to the question is that where Māori, Tiwi Māori, Tiwi Pākehā in this nation together, and that Māori have borne the brunt of colonisation, and that Pākehā allies who stand with people on these issues, whether inside government, outside government, in NGOs, in the community, in political parties, wherever we are, we need to be acknowledging tino rangatiratanga first. Tikana is the first law of the nation, and then we get to look and solve the issues. So, kia ora for that.
Kia ora, David. Oh, where are we? Oh, Gabe. Gabe's got a question.
Well, kia ora, Martin. I just want to say thank you so much for work that you've done and the hours it must have taken and effort you put in. One of the questions I had, I wondered after reading the book was how, with all of the information and all the bodies of evidence and the huge stacks of words that were out there, how did you sift through what to put in the book and what to keep out? I mean, I'm really interested in your process as a historian.
I mean, certainly, so it does grow out of my PhD thesis. So that was the first kind of step of it. For that, you've got a limited word count, so you try and stick the most important aspects that you can into there. But in terms of changing it into the book, I wanted it to be accessible to the public, for it not to be an academic text. So it was actually even made a bit shorter. But it was in the idea, I think, Mike, you described it as sort of, you know, light, not in terms of an insult for the book, that it's lightweight, but that it can be picked up, I hope, by even a late high school student, a 16, 17, 18-year-olds. And so then became the question of how to kind of build that narrative that would keep people interested. I wanted to keep a few major issues at play. The discussion over the quantification of loss. Ngāi Tahu was the only one that really engaged in a quantification of loss. How much did Ngāi Tahu actually lose in those millions of acres of lands of reserves not awarded? Obviously, money can't just provide for pain. You know, you say you are in the North Island through Ropatu, you're dying at the end of a bayonet, and for Ngāi Tahu, you're left starving on a rock, you know? And how can you pay some homage to that? And so I thought that was really important. Even just for the Pākehā community, they usually understand, oh, this is how much the loss is worth. What? It's worth billions, and this is an underestimate? So I really thought that was important. The way that the claim was fought throughout the iwi as well. You know, it was not easy to keep everybody on board. Māori communities are always expected to be 100% agreement on everything, but we can allow Parliament to exist. And so there was those views which I thought were really important as well, some of the opposition from within. And so those were some of the major kind of issues. The conservationist state, dealing with third-party interest, ooh, that was a huge surprise. But these are the major issues which I thought needed to come to the fore. I thought that they would appeal to people. Sometimes you need some dramatic effect to keep people's eyeballs and their ears and their eyes. But that was essentially some of how I came to it, wanting to highlight those key major themes, and then other work could hopefully come out of that.
So what have been some of the feedback that you've received on your rounds promoting the book from the general public?
It's mainly been positive, so somebody must be lying. Everybody is. I haven't done a ton. Mike, honestly, if I'm feeling down, I just read Mike's review in Te Karaka, because it's pretty much the nicest things. Also was reviewed on Radio NZ, and that was pretty positive. So I've had generally good feedback. I don't know if anybody's been too honest yet, but generally it has been good, and I hope for it to get some more publicity, hopefully, in the coming months, because I think it's a story that needs to be known not just by Te Waiponamu, but all of Aotearoa. Kia ora, Gabe.
If you think, on that note, I know you were sort of, you've spoken to the Canterbury U3A, which is like the Pākehā Blue Rinse Brigade, right? How was it received in that context?
It was actually amazingly received, and I'm going back to it. So U3A is sort of for retirees. They bring in academics of all types of fields. And it was amazing, actually. There was really good feedback. I mean, I'm doing another set with a different Christchurch U3A. People who were involved in different ways. I think even that older generation of Pākehā, there was one guy who came up to me after it and said, "Have they finished? Are they happy?" And I just kind of said, yep, it's done. The water claim hadn't been filed yet, so I just sort of smiled inside. And you can't always tell the truth all the time. But it has been a fantastic reaction from that community as well.
From all of that, when I was young, we weren't allowed to learn anything Maori. I lost a lot of rights of Maori, mana. I try to get back now, but it's too damn late. I'm all for whatever the Maoris can get out of here now, get it and keep hold like the Aids. Always. It's never going to happen. Big money is working now. Answer that.
I'd like to, but it would be both impolite and impolitic in this context, because I think it's, I played a major part in building the subsequent infrastructure of the Ngāi Tahu economy. Thank you. I've been pretty hoha at the way in which we've managed to also, in the same process, through our own political processes and commercial processes, lose a hell of a lot of what we acquired in 1998. I'm not talking of the COVID losses, the COVID-19 losses. I'm talking of decisions that made politically within the tribe, or accepted within the tribe, to dispose of assets. And I just have to say that some of those statistics are pretty horrific. But by the same token, I think the acceptance of that growing Maori economy and the uses it's put to have got an increasing level of acceptance in the wider society. And the letters to the editor, which I've been tracking for years, and which I've got in two files. There's Articulate Pricks file, there's a Kiwi Nasties file, and there's a Looney file. And they are, these files, I keep the base of them now in the Ngāi Tahu archive, but I've still got an eye open for them. And I wasn't so crude as to put the labels on these files. They were done by my office secretary, and but I willingly accepted them. But they've got, on the whole, as of today, there's even during the period of the claim before the time before the tribunal, 90% of the letters to the editor nationally came from 4 people. And there are those who live out their obsessions and get published in this way. And some of them were, at least 2 of them are now dead, I've noticed. And when I do meet them again, well, I hope not to be in the same residence, as I've condemned them to. But my point is that sort of opposition, insane, mad, is the same kind of thing you're looking at in United States politics at the moment. It's the congresswoman who's a QAnon backer. We've got people like that too. And they've been around a long time, a long, long time. And There was one of them who's now passed on too, who actually went to Bluff School. And I think he got beaten up by a Ngaitahu when he was a kid and in the playground, and he just carried the hurt. But he was a regular letter to the editor writer. And all of those people who hate like that and have those sort of sentiments and those crazy QAnon sort of things, they're our citizens. They've got the right to vote, and they a right to be in, exercise all their civil rights in the context of New Zealand. And, you know, that gets a bit hard to take when they're given credence. And so what I'd like to just get across to you is that a hell of a lot of that was focused commercially. But what I found was, as soon as you went your hand out and proposed to a critic, well, why don't you take the opportunity to invest with us, all of a sudden race relations developed a lovely rosy hue. And it was absolutely amazing. Peter Talley could never understand how Ngaitahu Fisheries managed to lose him nearly all his support within the South Island Commercial Fishermen's Association. It was very easy. We went around and offered to lease our fish out to their members in selected ports, and the effect was all of a sudden we became an addition to our perceived competition's lives, and the main commercial fisheries opposition to the fishery settlement collapsed. And you could say that the best solution to race relations is greed, but you could look at it in a nicer way. But when people see there's an opportunity for them, the Maori economy is good for New Zealand. Once that's accepted, you start getting a diminution in all the political tension and hate. And that, to me, is what today's about and what the partnership with the Crown's about.
And on that note, we're going to wrap up this session. Oh, and are you going to say something? Oh, no. We're going to wrap up this session and move into the next one. I'll just remind you all that lunch is on us, so that leaves your spare change to buy Martin's book, which, as I mentioned, will be for sale in the passageway. He needs to get his plane fare home, so don't be shy. I'll just ask you all to thank our speakers in the usual way, please.